Greetings and salutations. I hope all of you out there are having a good day. My name is Dave and this is Zilog and Moto, the YouTube channel dedicated to in-depth reviews of each and every English language release for the Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega CD, and 32X. If it can be played in and around a Genesis and I can read what's on the screen, it's going on one of these IKEA Billy shelves behind me that actually right now seem to be harder to find than an original Wisdom Tree game with the manual. Seriously, I never thought I'd have such trouble finding a freaking piece of painted wood. And I do also recognize that is about as first world a problem as someone can have, so I'm just going to shut up now and be content with the shelving that I currently have. Anyways, let's focus on the games that are sitting on said shelves, seeing as how that is the whole point of the channel. This week, that's one specific game that normally is right behind me, but you're probably not familiar with this specific version. If you're a Sega fan, either from their arcade presence or the Genesis, there's likely a 99% chance that you know the name Altered Beast. Altered Beast first appeared in Japanese arcades in June of 1988 and then made their way around the world throughout the rest of the year. The game was designed for Sega's venerable System 16 hardware, specifically the B version of that board, which was its most common incarnation, with over 25 other titles also using that same B version of the board. The Genesis, or Mega Drive depending on where you live, was designed around the System 16 arcade board, and while they certainly were not the same, with the System 16 overall being much more powerful than the Genesis, especially that B revision we're talking about, they had some common design principles, such as both utilizing versions of the Motorola 68000 and Zilog Z80 processors. And if you were wondering why the channel was called Zilog and Moto, well, there you go. Anyway, this similarity in hardware was completely planned, with the idea being that it would make it easier to port games that ran in the arcades on that System 16 to the Genesis for home consumption. Personally, I would have liked to have seen the Genesis be a little closer to a System 16 board, but I also understand that Sega was trying to hit a specific price point, and making it more powerful at the time just wasn't realistic. With Altered Beast being a hit in the arcades right before the release of the Genesis, it made perfect sense not only to port it to the Genesis, but to also make it its pack-in game to sell with the console. And it worked. That original box art with screenshots from the game is iconic. I've almost bought just the box over the years just to have it in the collection, because I've got enough Model 1s as is. However, while Altered Beast is most well known for being ported to the Genesis, what about its little brother, the Master System? Well, Altered Beast was ported there too, and technically it was released before the Genesis version, at least in the United States. I know the Genesis version of Altered Beast pretty well, and I covered it here back in Season 2 in Episode 71, specifically if you're curious what my thoughts were about that. To sum up though, it definitely hasn't aged well. But this video is for the Master System version, not that Genesis version. Will I think this holds up better? Or is the less powerful Master System really going to struggle? Well, we shall see, but first a look at the package.
And this is Altered Beast, specifically the Master System version, which should be immediately apparent due to having the white background and the wildly different artwork on the cover. This happens to be the North American version and not the PAL version, due to the fact that this is one of the North American Master System games that isn't very expensive, with it averaging about $25 right now on price charting, and that's about what I paid for it via eBay. However, without looking at the manual or the rear cover, you wouldn't be able to tell which version this was, as the cover art used is the same in most Master System releases. There was a later Brazilian re-release that used artwork that was more in line with the iconic Genesis version, yet somehow redrawn worse. But probably the less said about that, the better. This copy is in really good shape. For whatever reason, since it's somewhat common, I had plenty to choose from on eBay, so I didn't really have to struggle with picking a less than great copy versus spending a ton of money. The outer cover is pristine. I cleaned some sticker residue off of it, but other than that, I don't see any scratches on the cover, much less any other weirdness like pits or tears. Also, the hang tab is intact at the top of the case, which is always a good sign. Along with the outer cover being in great shape, the inner cover is held up as well, with no sun damage, water damage, or edge wear. As far as the cover goes, it's okay. Definitely not as good as the Genesis version, but at least it's actual art as opposed to earlier Master System releases. And no, I'm never going to get tired of showing that awful pro wrestling cover. Rather than showing any enemies from the game, instead the art shows your transformation from man into beast, and there's actually a little foreshadowing going on here, in that 3 forms are shown, but in the arcade and Genesis versions, your character has 4 forms. More on that in a bit. The logo looks solid up top, and the blue really pops on the white background. Flipping over the back, and you can definitely tell this is the North American version, as all of the flavor text over to the right is in English. And there's a lot of it. It sells the game well, and I especially like this section at the bottom. Fail, and Athena's fate will be unspeakable. Win, and you may take a place in the pantheon of immortality. Man, that's some high-stakes Ultra Beast copy there. I like that we got 4 screenshots from the game over to the left. They're all decent quality for the size, and they each show a different level. Unfortunately, down at the bottom, we get an indication of some of the things that Sega had to cut to create this Master System version. Take a look at both the number of players and levels, and yes, the Master System version is only a 1-player game instead of 2, and only 4 levels are present from the original 5. This isn't necessarily a deal breaker though, because if you remember, Forgotten Worlds went through similar editing, so we'll just have to see how it turned out. Opening up the package, and I've got to say, I'm impressed with this manual. Like a lot of other Master System manuals, even though it's just 2 colors, there's tons of pictures from the game, and most importantly, some great hand-drawn artwork of enemies, along with descriptions of each of them. Ultra Beast is simple enough to where you really don't need a manual, but this definitely complements the package well, and you probably wouldn't know how to continue the game without it. Well, in the pre-online days anyway. Okay, well that's the package. Let's fire it up and try to rescue Athena. Before getting to the review proper, I just wanted to make a quick technical note. I had a hell of a time getting this game to run through my standard method, which is using a Model 1 Genesis and an official power-based converter. And by hell of a time, I mean I couldn't get it to work at all. Clean the cartridge? Nothing. Clean the power-based converter? Nothing. Clean the Genesis? Nothing. Tried my other Genesis as part of my Tower of Power? Nothing. In the end, the only thing I was able to make work was playing the game in my original Model 1 Master System, which is why you probably noticed the presence of jail bars that you probably aren't used to seeing in these videos. At some point I'll have to send this Master System off to get modded to clean that up, but it just hasn't been a priority since I rarely actually use it. But in this case, it definitely was nice to have as a backup. Also, it should be noted that as far as I know, there isn't supposed to be any issues with running Ultra Beast, especially a NTSC copy on a Genesis with a PBC, but it sure didn't work for me, so your mileage may vary. If you're not familiar with Ultra Beast, I'm going to assume you either weren't around the arcades in the late 80s and early 90s, or didn't have much experience with the early lifespan of the Genesis. But to sum up the story of the game, your character is a former Roman centurion who died in battle, and at the beginning of the game, Zeus resurrects you with the famous line of digital speech, "Rise from your grave," which starts every game. Now, at first I was very confused by this, because when I think Zeus, I think Greek mythology, not Roman. And if you look into it, technically, if you're dealing with Roman mythology, Zeus should actually be referred to as Jupiter. By that same token, with the goal of the game being to rescue Zeus' daughter Athena, Athena was known in Roman mythology as Minerva. Also, you are rescuing Athena from the Lord of the Underworld, referred to in the game as Neph. Try as I might, I couldn't find a god in either Greek or Roman mythology named Neph, but from the way Neph is represented in the game, it seems that Neph might actually be referring to Hades, or Pluto in Roman mythology. So, why is all this so goofed up? Well, I'm going to assume it's simply due to the game originally coming from Japan, and these are all translation issues. None of it really matters, and it's probably best to just remember that it's just an arcade side-scrolling action game at its core, and the mythology is really just to give the game an original theme, in an era when most games of the sort were involving modern gang members and ninjas, things like Vigilante or Ninja Warriors. If you're going to get upset about mixing and matching Roman and Greek names, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that Altered Beast, no matter which incarnation you run into, probably isn't for you. The reason why I specifically just called out Vigilante and Ninja Warriors is because, like those two titles, Altered Beast is strictly a 2D action title. In doing research for the game, I saw someone refer to Altered Beast as a beat-em-up, and that's not really accurate. I suppose there is lots of punching and kicking involved as you progress through the game, but when I think of beat-em-ups, I think about games that have a pseudo 3D layout, where along with moving left and right, you can also move your character up and down, meaning towards the top of the screen and away from the player, and then also towards the bottom of the screen and closer to the player. Altered Beast doesn't have any of that. It's a strictly left-to-right affair, with the occasional jumping up or down on platforms to change height levels. From the first alteration of the Master System version from the arcade, that occasional platform to jump on has become a seldom appearing platform, because while the arcade version had lots of dynamically appearing platforms that could be destroyed, either by you or certain enemies, all of those have been removed, leaving only the few background platforms that are primarily in the last two levels. In fact, this portion of the game has been so de-emphasized, the first time I played the game, I thought the platforms had been removed entirely. This brings up the second thing that was changed from the arcade version, and it's a bit more significant. Part of the plot of Altered Beast is that to fight Neff and his supernatural monsters, you can't just fight as you are. Sure, you were originally a tough Roman centurion, the best of the best when it comes to human soldiers, but you're going to need some help to take on these hordes. That's why you have the ability to power up, and you know that's what you're doing because even in the Master System version, there's a bit of speech stating such each time you do so. You do this by grabbing a spirit ball that floats up after killing a special white Cerberus, or as the manual refers to it, a three-headed wolf, that is, drawn with only two heads. But I digress. Anyway, the goal in each level is to power up 3 times, with the first time upgrading to just a merely more buff version of yourself, then a super bodybuilder looking guy reminiscent of prime Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then, finally, you go into literal beast mode by transforming into each level's namesake Altered Beast, complete with cutscenes showing this transformation. This beast mode plays slightly different each level depending on which beast is associated with that level, requiring you to get familiar with the quirks of each one. That's how the game is supposed to work anyway. In the next change to the Master System version specifically, there's no longer a first stage upgrade. You just go straight to Arnold, and then the beast. It's not a big deal, as the first and second modes largely play the same, but what it means is that now you only have to collect 2 spirit balls per level. And you do have to collect both spirit balls. If you happen to miss one of the white Cerberuses, Anyway, if you miss one of the white wolves, you'll have to keep playing the level until you turn into beast mode, as you can't fight the boss without it. Or, you can if you go far enough to get Neff to appear 3 times, at least in the original Genesis versions. I didn't try it in the Master System version, but I assume it's the same. But you really don't want to do that, as fighting the end bosses still in human form is a bad idea. Having said all that, let's get back to the original change I mentioned, the multiple heights in the original version. What happens if you go up on top of a platform and the white wolf is going past on the lower level? Well, if you're playing the original game, chances are you've screwed yourself, and you have to now survive just a bit longer to run across another one. But now in the Master System version, that's not nearly as much of a concern, with the fewer platforms available to be on, and instead you'll just be concentrating on not letting the white wolf pass due to being tangled up with other enemies. There was no question that some changes were going to have to be made to get the game to run on the Master System, but both lack of platforms to jump on and the fewer spirit balls required to transform significantly simplify the game. While we're on the subject of cuts that have drastically altered the game, there's 2 other major ones to discuss, and those are 2 that were mentioned on the back of the box. Altered Beast was originally designed as a 1 or 2 player arcade game, and that multiplayer focus was definitely a selling point for most home versions of the game, even on less powerful machines like the Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, and Amstrad CPC. How well the 2-player mode actually worked on those versions is beside the point, but at least they tried. However, the Master System version is the only version I'm aware of, other than the bizarre NES port, that only features 1 player. Storyline-wise, I suppose it makes sense that Zeus was telling 1 guy to rescue Athena rather than 2, but that's somewhat cold comfort if you've got 2 people wanting to take on the hordes. The second major cut is that there's a whole level missing. The entire original 3rd level is gone, leaving the game with only 4 levels. Personally, while I understand having to cut certain things to make the game fit, this is pretty inexcusable, considering the whole game only consisted of 5 levels to begin with, so losing 20% of the game is a pretty large-scale loss. I've got a theory that the third level was cut because its original form relies heavily on a multi-platform level design, which I already mentioned was not as prioritized in this version, but it could just be something that had to go, and the third level was the level that drew the short straw. Okay, now that I've discussed what was removed from the game, I should probably discuss what's actually here. And wow, it's a mess, as I'm sure you can tell if you've been watching the game footage. I made reference previously to how much I enjoyed the Master System version of Forgotten Worlds, even though it was scaled down, and I was hoping that Alter Beast would have similar success. Well, it took about 5 seconds of playing it to know that this was not the case, and that it was an insult to mention Forgotten Worlds in conjunction with this game. Alter Beast on the Master System is a flat-out mess graphically. Sure, it resembles the original, a lot more than other versions to be sure, but at what cost? The frame rate is absolutely abysmal, running about a steady 1 frame per second. I assume that's due to the constant motion of the background, as the game does steadily move you from left to right. But this is one of those titles where I'm floored that it was released in this condition. Sure, it's playable, but at what cost? And of course there was no 2-player mode, because if one player is this much of a fabulous disaster, just imagine trying to add a second player to the mix. I can only assume and hope that this was the result of an extremely rushed development in an effort to get the game to market before the Genesis version hit. But at the same time, this never ever should have been released in this condition, as it's an embarrassment. I've not mentioned the audio yet, so I suppose I should real quick. It's fine. Really nothing special here, and it's not specifically bad, but it's not great either. Just pretty run-of-the-mill Master System audio for the time. The game does have an alternate FM audio track, and while in the past, most of the times when I've run across games like that, it ends up being a wash of having slightly better music at the cost of less impressive sound effects. However, in the case of Alter Beast, you would definitely benefit from running FM audio if it's available to you, as the music is significantly upgraded and the effects hold up better than usual. All told, Alter Beast on the Master System is a flat-out disaster. I now completely understand why the North American version was available so cheaply, because this is awful. I wouldn't even call this Alter Beast. It's just a pixely slideshow that somewhat resembles Alter Beast after it's been downsampled a few times. I was so close to giving this game a total bomb rating, but given that it did technically come out before the Genesis version, and it is functional, I'm going to give it 1 star. However, don't play this, under any circumstances. There's simply no reason to put yourself through it in 2022. In fact, if you didn't realize this port existed before watching this video, try to go back to forgetting it was released, because it certainly seems like the developers did.
Okay, that was Alter Beast for the Master System. I've already gone on record as not loving the game at all in any fashion. I suppose the original arcade version and Genesis ports are fine if you want to waste 20 minutes, but that's about all it'll take to finish them and then move on to something else. But a bad port of a game that I already really don't care about? My entertainment this week was purely in car wreck fashion, just playing the game to see, well, how bad could it actually be? And the answer is, this one required 2 fire trucks and it was still DOA. Tune in next week, as even though I'm staying on the Master System, I'm going in a wildly different direction. Honestly, this game is somewhat unique in the console space, but it does relate back to a game that I reviewed about 100 episodes ago, at least tangentially. This is not a game that I normally would choose to play, but I could see how it was sold in the era, as games were much simpler and it made sense without appearing to be total shovelware. We'll see how it compares to that previous title I mentioned, since technically this one came first, and I probably should have paid more attention to that when I put it on the schedule originally. Well, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 171. If you like what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you're so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later!